I'm the co-president of the League of Women Voters for Berkeley Heights, New Providence, and Summit. I'm glad you could all make it out tonight on a not very nice evening weather-wise. Before we get started, I just want to read one thing, and that is the League is political but nonpartisan. It never supports political parties or candidates, but it does study issues. It develops consensus positions, and the League does actively work to support those positions. So there seems to have been recently a lot of questions to me about whether the League is partisan, nonpartisan, bipartisan. It's nonpartisan, but political, if that makes sense. So maybe that can be helpful, and it will eliminate 25 emails that I get tomorrow morning. That'd be good. The League is almost 100 years old, and it was started pretty much, I tend to think of it sort of from the spirit of the suffrage movement and the shock of the First World War. It was just a really good idea that a nonpartisan civic organization could provide the education and experience the public needed at the time. And that's really what the League was born from. A lot of women, when they were given the right to vote, didn't really know information about issues, and rather than choose to just vote in the manner in which their husbands voted, they got together and they learned about issues, which is pretty much what we're going to do tonight. We're going to learn about some women's issues and some work that's being done to help correct situations that have existed for far too long. So I'm going to read you a little bit of a bio on our speaker, and hopefully not annihilate Anjali's last name. Anjali Mehrotra, is that right? Okay. Was born and raised in Calcutta, India. She came to New Jersey at the age of 19 to pursue higher education and received a Bachelor of Engineering and a Master of Science from Stevens Institute of Technology in the field of computer science. For 7 years, she worked as a software consultant for manufacturing firms, and then after a brief break, went back to school to obtain a certification in digital design from Parsons and started her own freelance graphic design business. At the same time, she became very involved in her community. She led several volunteer organizations and was even president of the Governor Livingston PTO. For the last 3 years, she has been heavily involved in political campaigns, following her passion to see more women elected to office at all levels of government. In 2018, she herself ran for borough council in her town, which is Mountainside, experiencing firsthand all the challenges faced by women running for office. In spite of all the challenges, and in spite of the fact that she was a newcomer to running for political office, she raised a record amount of funds, and she came this close to being elected with 48% of the vote. Okay. Through her experiences, she strongly identifies as a feminist. This has led her to her current role as president of the National Organization for Women of New Jersey. Some people told me it was Union County. Incorrect. New Jersey. Correct. She loves her job as an advocate for women of all ethnic backgrounds and across the socioeconomic spectrum, pushing for legislation to improve their lives and the lives of their families. She lives in Mountainside with her husband, and she has 2 twin daughters who are currently seniors in college at the University of Chicago. So, that being said, that's pretty amazing, and I'd like you to welcome her to speak to you.
I want to start by thanking the League of Women Voters of Berkeley Heights, New Providence, and Summit for inviting me here tonight. I am also a member of the chapter, so it gives me great pleasure to be with you guys tonight. And as Susan said before, the weather is not lovely, so I do appreciate all of you coming out. I'm going to cover a lot of stuff, so I'm going to ask that you hold your questions till the end, and then I'll be happy to take them. So all the things that I'm going to cover are basically going to fall under 3 categories. I'm going to talk a little bit about the feminist movement, where we are, where we came from, what it means to me personally, what other people think of it. I'm going to talk about why it's necessary, why do we need this movement, why is it important, and lastly, I'm going to talk about what we're doing. So, actual legislation and the things that we're pursuing, both at the national level and at the state level. I want to start with sharing a little story about my friend. This is my friend Asma Khan. Asma and I went to high school together. She grew up in a conservative Muslim family in Calcutta and moved to the UK after she got married. Asma went to law school at Cambridge, became a lawyer, and then followed on to get a PhD in constitutional law. But that was not her passion. She did not love law. What she loved was cooking. So over the objection of her family, and especially her husband, she said she wanted to get into the restaurant business. She started off by doing what she called supper clubs at home, which was, groups of usually 20 to 30 people that she would cook for. These are strangers that would come to her house. And she realized that the joy that she got from watching people enjoy her food was what she wanted to do. She went on to host a pop-up restaurant, and then she finally opened her own restaurant in London. Asma is now a rising star on the London food scene. She is in fact the first British chef to be featured on the acclaimed Netflix series Chef's Table. So if you want, you can actually go and watch her. She's on, I think it's season 6 right now, or season 8, yeah. On the top right is a picture of Asma's kitchen staff. And as you will notice, they're all women. Asma is very, very proud of the fact that she has an all-female kitchen, which is, believe it or not, rare. We know that as women, we tend to be the primary cooks at home, right? But even today, in the restaurant industry, we are pretty underrepresented. So Asma takes great pride in the fact that she has an all-female kitchen. She writes a lot about it. That's one of her selling points in social media and all of that. And she really believes in empowering women and lifting them. Also, all her cooks originated as home chefs or home cooks. They're not professionally trained. These were women in her neighborhood, in her community. Most of them are immigrants. When I met Asma in 2016, this is before she had opened her restaurant, I met her in London. And she shared something else that was unique to these women. She said to me, they are all, or we are all rather, because Asma is one too, we are all second daughters. And for a minute, that struck me, like second daughters. So in a country like India, and some of these women are from neighboring countries like Bangladesh, Nepal, women are not only suppressed by society, there are a multitude of reasons, social, cultural, where they all want a male child. So when a young couple gets married and they have their first child and it's a girl, it's a disappointment. But they're like, it's okay. It's the first one. We'll have another one. It will be a boy. Right? So when the second one is now a girl, this is not just a disappointment. It's like tragedy struck the family. And it really is heartbreaking what these women go through. And the reason it really stayed with me, and the reason it really struck a chord with me and touched me in my heart, was because I, too, am the second daughter. So the pictures here are of my family. I grew up in what in India is called a joint family. It's basically an extended family. So my father's younger brother and his family lived with us. We all lived in the same house. The picture on the left, that's me in the middle, and that's my sister, who is writing something on a piece of paper. My sister is 13 years older than me. So she was the first daughter. The picture on the right is me again with my cousin, And my cousin is only 9 days older than me, so we grew up like twins. And we always shared our birthdays. And my cousin, too, was a first daughter, or is a first daughter, I should say. And growing up, I was always struck by the fact that it did not seem like I was treated the same way that they were. I watched these two other women, young women in my household, get all the nurturing and the adoration of their parents that I just did not seem to get the same level of support. And I never really understood that. So when Asma talked to me about being a second daughter, it was like a light bulb went off, like everything suddenly fell into place. Growing up in India, there were many societal norms, cultural things, traditions, religious, whatever, that keep women in their place in a variety of ways. And I don't like to think of myself as a rebel, because to me, the picture of a rebel is like somebody with like a picket sign or, constantly angry. But I would say that I was a challenger. So every time somebody told me I couldn't do something or I had to do certain things a certain way, and it did sit well with me, I challenged it. So through a lifetime of fighting these everyday battles, without me realizing, I became a feminist. I was very lucky that I did actually have a dad who supported me in my educational dreams, because I was not really supposed to have a career, or the fact that I wanted to be an engineer. Honestly, my mother didn't know what to do with me. But he did allow me to come to the United States to pursue my engineering degree. And when I first came here, I came with the idea that I'm going to study here for 4 years and go back. So I wasn't really paying attention to politics, the news. I didn't understand, the American system, and I didn't really pay attention. And then I graduated in 1991, and I decided to stay on for my master's. And that October, something else happened. And I remember watching these judicial hearings, the Senate Judiciary confirmation hearings for Clarence Thomas. And I remember being absolutely transfixed by what I was seeing on the screen. Because when I first came to America, I honestly did feel like I was free. I felt like I could breathe. I could make my own choices. I didn't have to fit into some gender role that somebody else was prescribing for me. And then to see these hearings was kind of mind-blowing. And what stayed with me, what I remember from that, is not so much what they asked of her or the stories she told about what happened to her, but it was more the attitude of these senators, the way they spoke to her. And all I remember from that is that they were really condescending. And here was this young black woman, talking about experiences that were very painful, that nobody really had come out and talked about before. And she was doing this in this august setting where, the entire nation is focused on her. And she's finally found her voice. And yet, these men somehow managed to make her feel unheard. And that really stayed with me. And I guess it's not really a coincidence, because sociologists actually do point to that one incident as being the reason for a whole generation of feminists. And these feminists were different from the ones that came before them, because more than anything, they realized the importance of representation. So as it says in 1992, which was the year following that, there was a historic win for women in Congress. Historic for them. Now, of course, we know more. And we had what they actually dubbed the third wave of the feminist movement. And they also talk about what's going on now, post the 2016 elections, as possibly the fourth wave. So just briefly, the first wave was the original feminists that I'm sure you're all familiar with, which was the suffragists. And the second is the one that we most likely identify with the women's movement, which was in the 1960s and the 70s, when you had, Gloria Steinem, and you had Now Formed, and all of those. And they really seek to equal opportunity and, to erase the sort of underlying sexism that we see in our society. The impetus for actually the formation of NOW was there was a conference on equal opportunity, and the administration at that time actually refused to enforce a law that was already on the books to prevent gender discrimination in hiring practices. And a group of women got together in a hotel room and decided we're going to form our own organization. Modern feminism. There's a lot of young people out there that may not necessarily define themselves as feminists, but they are, because they believe in all the same values. One of the things that's really different about this new feminism is they're very focused on inclusion. Feminists of the past have gotten this sort of reputation of not including people of color, not necessarily including people of different sexual orientation, and the modern feminists are very focused on that inclusion. The other thing that's really different this time around is the idea that it's digitally driven, which means that these feminists not just share ideas and things, but they actually drive their activism through social media, through emails, through websites, everything that is digital now. And we see that even with like the Women's March, for example. So even though that was actually a physical march where people went to wherever, whether it was in DC or all these other cities around the world, but the word of mouth was really through digital media. And we see that continuing with the activism today. One of the other things that is very big on feminism, and it's really interesting because I was actually at a meeting yesterday in Trenton where this came up, is the idea of intersectionality. What intersectionality was a sociologist, Kimberly Crenshaw, who mainly did gender studies and especially black feminism is what she studied. She wrote a paper in 1989 where she defined this term that she coined, really. And the way she described it actually, intersectionality, is she said that it's kind of like if you have two streets at a crossroad, at an intersection, right? And there's all this traffic, and it's very crowded. And now there's an accident. And she said chances are that it's not just two cars that hit each other, but there might be a multitude of factors that all sort of combined to get you to that accident. And that's how she described intersectionality, because she said being a woman of color means discrimination not just because you're a woman, not just because you're a person of color, but the fact that you're a woman of color has these additional layers of discrimination built in. And to give you a little example to sort of really bring that home, as you can imagine, in my life I have been discriminated for a variety of things, right? I'm an immigrant, I'm definitely of color, different culture, language, woman. But if I were to ask you, what do you think is the one thing that I've faced the most discrimination for? Any guesses? Anybody else?
Your height.
You're actually close, but so on that, actually, it's been for my weight. So I have been overweight all my life. I was overweight as a child. I was overweight as a teenager. I have yo-yoed. I've done all kinds of diets, exercise, all kinds of different things. And the reason I say that is because we know that women face discrimination in terms of how they look, right? What you wear, do you wear makeup, the shoes you wear, the hair, all of that, right? And we know that overweight men face discrimination as well. But a woman who is overweight is body shamed in a completely different way, right? it's not the same as a man. There's this additional layer that society puts on women in terms of their image and how they look. And that, to me, is how intersectionalism kind of works. Because if you look at it, all of these different factors can be another level of discrimination. So the Me Too movement has been another driving force, as you can imagine, for the modern feminists. And this one, again, is also a little different from the ones in the previous sort of generations of feminists. And the way that this is different is that we're finally holding accountable men in positions of power for their behavior. And we've never seen that done before in feminism. So I think that's really interesting. As I mentioned before, we need more young women to sort of embrace their feminist self. So it's actually great to see role models like Emma Watson, which a lot of young people, look out to come out and say that, don't be afraid of the word. Embrace it, because, I have two young girls. They obviously believe in equality for women, and that's what feminism is about. Which brings me to equality and the ERA. So this is the wording of the ERA. It's equality of rights under the law shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or any state on account of sex. It's 24 words. For some reason, this puts fear in a lot of people. Just in a moment. And I'm not sure why. So the ERA, or the Equal Rights Amendment, I'm going to go through a brief history of it. For those of you who are not familiar, it was first proposed by Alice Paul in 1923, right after the 19th Amendment was passed. Alice Paul was actually a suffragette. She was actually the last wave who actually, saw success finally. And she realized, though, that getting the right to vote was not going to be enough. That in order for women to truly be treated equally under the eyes of the law, we needed an amendment to the Constitution. She proposed it in 1923. It sat there for many years. It was introduced in every session of Congress. However, nothing really happened until the 1960s and the 70s, when the second wave feminists really took that up as their cause. And in 1972, it was actually March 22nd. So we're March 21st, tomorrow's the anniversary, when finally the House and the Senate passed it. The way an amendment gets passed is you need 2/3 majority vote in both the House of Representatives and the Senate, and then it needs ratification by 3/4 of the states, 3/4 of the states, which is 38 states. When the Senate passed it, they also put a deadline on the ratification, which originally was 1979. The same day that the Senate voted, Hawaii became the first state to ratify it. In the successive years, there was a number of states that jumped on that bandwagon pretty quickly, and the numbers climbed up. And in 1977, we were up to 35, pretty short. And as these feminists kept fighting and trying to get the additional states to ratify it, they realized that the deadline was coming up close. So in 1978, NOW organized a march, and at that time it was the largest march in Washington by women. It was over 100,000 women that marched to ask for an extension of the deadline. Interestingly, the League of Women Voters actually opposed the extension of the deadline because they felt that keeping it to the original deadline would apply pressure on additional states to ratify. The deadline was extended. It was extended to June 30th, 1982. And even though these feminists kept fighting for it, they did not get any additional states to sign on. So we're stuck at 35 at that point. I really like this slide. going to read this because it makes reference to one of my favorite Maya Angelou poems, and I think it's very true of what's going on. It says, you can block it in committee, you can bury it in Congress, you can set an arbitrary deadline, throw in a fear-mongering female. Does everybody know who that was?
Yeah.
Conservative icon and Ronald Reagan, and still from the ashes it will rise. And the reason I like that is because it has risen. So after the 2016 election, in 2017, after 40 years of like total inaction, nothing was going on. In March of 2017, Nevada became the 36th state to ratify the ERA. In 2018, Illinois became the 37th state to ratify. So we're one short. There is a lot of effort right now in some states, as you can imagine, to get that 38th state. The battleground states right now are Virginia, Arizona, Florida, and North Carolina. And that's where we're hoping we're going to get one more state. Why does it matter? There's a lot of women, men, people who are not proponents of the ERA that argue that the 14th Amendment gives us all the rights we need. We don't need the ERA. We're already equal in the eyes of the law. But the problem is that when it comes to enforcement of the law, because the Constitution does not specify gender as a protected class the way it does race or religion, when we butt up against that in any kind of law or case that comes up in front of the Supreme Court, we lose. And a great example of that is the Hobby Lobby versus Burwell case. So when the Affordable Care Act was passed, one of the requirements in that was that insurance companies cover contraceptive needs of women. And Hobby Lobby challenged that, saying that the religious beliefs of the owners should allow them to exempt themselves from that. And when that case was presented in front of the Supreme Court, because Hobby Lobby's religious practices fell under what is called strict scrutiny, which means you have to really have a really good reason to not support that, and the gender discrimination did not, we lost. And this is why most proponents and most feminists believe that we need the ERA. We need that protection in the Constitution. So going back to, remember when I said Nevada became in 2017 became the 36th state, and it seemed to come out of nowhere? 40 years of inaction, and then all of a sudden Nevada ratifies the ERA. Where did that come from? So here's an interesting story. So the state senator who led that effort, her name was Pat Spearman. And she was not only a woman, she was a veteran, she was gay. And she started leading that effort in 2015. In 2017, when Nevada ratified it, 40% of their legislature was women. 40%. Today, after the 2018 election, Nevada has become the first state to have a majority of women, that is over 50% in their legislature. So this is why, to me, representation matters. This is why we need more women in every level of government. I was actually ready to run over this weekend, and there was a pollster there, and she talked about a lot of polling that they do about voters' attitudes towards women. And one of the interesting things that she shared was that they can actually judge if a voter is likely to vote for a woman based on how they think a woman will govern. And they said there was a direct correlation between people who thought that women govern differently, not better, differently from men. If they believed that, they were more likely to vote for a woman, which I thought was really interesting. So as you can see, we have made some strides, I'm sure. I'm sure we all recognize that in terms of the women elected to office. The numbers on the left, the 51 of 100, is the actual population number. So 51% of the total population in the US are women. Of the voting population, it's actually higher. It's about 54%. And yet the representation is about 1 in 4, which is at 25. So we are nowhere close. So the interesting numbers to me, in Congress, we're at about 23.7%. You will see in the legislature, nationally, we're at 28.7%. New Jersey is a little bit higher. It's at 30.8%. We actually rank about 19th, I believe, in terms of states of having women in our legislature. We still have a long way to go, because you can look at the mayors, not so great. 710. And I think this really tells the picture. That even though we can look at these numbers that look good, but of all the women, of all the representatives that New Jersey has sent to the House of Representatives in all the years, we have only had 7 women. We have only had 1 governor, and she was not a Democrat, which is surprising. And we have had 0 senators from New Jersey. So we would like to see all these numbers change. Is it going to change? Looking forward to 2020. So yes, we're making strides, and it's very encouraging to see all the women who are running for president. But at the same time, I think we also need to recognize the misogyny that's out there, especially in the media, the bias, the gender bias, and how that affects everyone. And it's really sad to see that some of these campaigns are in such early stages and they're already being attacked. Kamala Harris was attacked for her love life. Like, what does that have to do with her qualifications or how she would be as a president? We saw Amy Klobuchar attacked for being a mean boss, which to me is really funny because, when you read about Joe Biden, for example, most people in Washington know that he has a temper, but the media portrays him as this friendly guy, somebody you would like to go out for a beer with, right? But I think the most telling story that I found out there was about Kristen Gillibrand. So Kristen Gillibrand had this awkward moment on TV where I think she was going to eat fried chicken, and she was like, should I use my fork and knife, or should I use my hands? What should I do? And the reason why that's a big deal is because media studies show, so for somebody like Kristen Gillibrand, who's not a national name, right? Most people in this country have never heard of her. And she's trying to get on this national stage. And if that's the first thing that voters out there are going to read about her, and it's going to be, media article after media article, when you go to a voter and ask them, how do you feel about Kristen Gillibrand? They're more likely to say something like, oh, I think she might be a little elitist. Maybe she's not so authentic. So little things like that shape not just, public opinion, but it actually, causes voter bias. And that's why it's really, really important. The other thing that was actually interesting to me at that Rutgers Ready to Run weekend was the fact that we talked about media bias, and we talked about they had done studies with control groups, and they had presented them with a variety of candidates, 1 male and then 3 women of different ethnicities. And they've just provided them first with like a qualifications, a resume, and then there was like an attack. And they studied the difference between just a issues-based attack or a gender bias-based attack, and how that number fell or went up. And they found that when the gender bias attack was done, the numbers actually went down lower than just the issue attack. But they also found that when the candidate actually rebutted it, the numbers did tend to go back up. So that's interesting too. So as feminists, the other thing, the takeaway was it doesn't even have to be the candidate who does the rebuttal. It can be an organization, it can be anybody who calls the media out. So that was a great takeaway. The other thing that was interesting to me from Ready to Run, and you will see if you go to the COP website, they have a lot of facts and figures on, for the breakdown of these numbers of, women in politics, and it's overwhelmingly Democrats. It's very sort of disapproved. The proportions are just like nowhere even close. Like I think the Democrats are like, I don't know, like 200 or 300% of the Republicans. And what was interesting to me was when I went to Ready to Run this weekend, there was about 150 or so women there, and they were at least, I would say, 95% Democrats there. And there was Republicans, the NJ GOP was actually tabling outside for the entire event. The Democrats were nowhere to be seen. But it led me to think about why is it that we have this discrepancy. And we had some Republican women on the panels that talked about how, we're desperate, we want women, we want to send women to office. So why is it that women in the Republican Party are not choosing to run? And I think in the end, the Republican Party, as we know it now, just doesn't share the values of women for the most part. And that's why they're having a problem recruiting women to run for them. So post 2016, there's a reason why we have this sort of surge, right, in feminism and activism. And as you can see, these are just a few examples of how the Trump administration really has women under the attack. The latest one is the Title 10. This, some of you may have heard of, is commonly referred to as the gag rule. Title 10 is a lot of Medicaid kind of funding for women in marginalized communities. That's what they rely on. And they're taking it away from any clinic or physician that does family planning. If they talk about abortion, they are not eligible for Title 10 funding, which means like places like Planned Parenthood will no longer get that funding. So women who need that most, will not be able to get that health care. So it doesn't matter if they were going there for a pap smear or they were just going there to get a checkup. They can't do it in that facility. We're not taking it lying down either. So a number of states, including New Jersey, the ACLU, and Planned Parenthood are suing the Trump administration for this. So it is tied up in the courts right now. But there's a bunch of things that we're fighting every day. Now on the national level is very inclusive, but we do have what we call our 6 core issues. As you can imagine, constitutional equality, or the ERA, is a big one for us. So last month, the fight was in Virginia, and National Now was in Virginia, marching, at the State House. Some of the other things, obviously, reproductive health, reproductive rights are very big. We're also racism, racial justice, as we like to call it, which can be not just fighting against racism, but specifically focusing on issues like women and incarceration, women in prison. And in New Jersey we have, I don't know if you're aware of it, but sexual assault of women in prison is a big deal in New Jersey and a lot around the country. We fight for LGBTQ issues. We obviously are looking for an end of violence against women, so whether that's sexual assault, domestic assault, in whatever form it takes. And then the last one that we're fighting for is economic justice, and that could be things like equal pay, or even family leave. So even though family leave is gender neutral, the reality is that there's more women who tend to be caretakers and need that than men. So we look at it as a women's issue. On the state level, we have a bunch of bills that we are following that are actually doing really well under this administration. And So we have 14 maternal health bills that are actually being championed by our First Lady, Tammy Murphy, that are looking at infant and maternal mortality, and especially trying to fight that in, again, the marginalized inner city areas like Trenton, Camden, Newark, Elizabeth. So one of the key things in this is the Medicaid funding for doula care. I was actually at a round table about 2 weeks ago where they talked about that, and for this fiscal year, they're looking at $1 million in the budget, and they think that will go up. And I've actually talked to other physicians, gynecologists, and they all agree that doula care leads to much improved mortality and, child and maternal rates. So they feel that it's very important. Shockingly, anybody want to take a guess on where New Jersey ranks in maternal mortality in the 50 states?
Pretty low. It's like 43rd or something.
47.
Wow.
Incredible.
But
The menstrual equality bill has just been introduced, so it's very new. It hasn't really gone far. We are working on, as a state organization, to really push that. Right now, it's proposed only for public schools. We're trying to see if we can get it expanded to any public building. The civil action statute of limitations for sexual abuse, that bill is actually very hot right now. It passed the Senate Judiciary Committee, it passed the Senate. Now we're waiting for the Assembly. And we don't think it's really going to be much of a fight in the Assembly, so it should go through. Anybody want to take a guess on which organizations are fighting that bill?
Sure.
Yeah. So I found it really interesting that the lead sponsors of the bill were all Catholic men. And, we do think that that one will probably go through by the end of this month. The Let's Drive NJ is an organization that is working on, I don't know if you know, but we're all supposed to get new driver's licenses because it's supposed to follow a different standard so that we can use it for travel. And part of what that new driver's license is going to look like, they're going to have a bill on that, and part of that effort is to provide licenses for undocumented workers in the state. 12 states plus DC already have that in their bills. So New Jersey is hoping to get that to resolve. Some of the other things that we're working for at the state level, gender neutral ballots. So that's one very close to my home. So last year when I ran for council in Mount Side, the ballot for the position that I ran for said councilman. And it's hard to believe that this is 2019, or it was 2018, and that was still the case. And we're very big on the fact that words matter, because especially to our young girls, that we're telling them you can achieve whatever you want. You can go out there and, the sky's the limit, and then they see a ballot and it says councilman. So we started lobbying for that, to change that, and I'm happy to report as of this week that in your June primary in Union County, you will see gender neutral ballots. We are hoping to expand that statewide. Most of the counties are already gender neutral, but the way the New Jersey Constitution has it, the county clerk in each county gets to design their own ballot. So believe it or not, all 21 counties, they all look different. So we want to make sure that we put in some kind of permanent, either legislation, executive order, whatever it takes to make sure that that is done statewide. And we're working with the New Jersey League of Municipalities to get that done. Women in law, enforcement facing discrimination. So as you can imagine, like any other workplace, women who are in law enforcement face gender discrimination, just general gender discrimination and sexual harassment. They tend to be very, very, very underrepresented. This is a very male-dominated workplace, as you can imagine, in most workplaces, women are probably less than 5%. And there's an additional pressure on them because of the whole, what happens in a police department, you don't go outside and talk about it. So the fact that they're going through this, they can't even say anything to anybody. So we actually have somebody on our board who was a former police officer and faced both gender discrimination and sexual harassment. She quit. Finally, she's suing her former employers. And she's very focused on this issue. And we're working with the state attorney general's office and the Division of Women to see what we can do. Crisis pregnancy centers. These are fake clinics that masquerade as abortion clinics. And their hope is that they're going to get some young girl who is unsure. She finds herself pregnant. She doesn't know what to do. And she's coming to talk about her options. And if she happens upon one of these organizations, they're going to talk her out of getting an abortion. They won't even present that as a solution, as an option. So we are looking at how we can expose these because there are a bunch of them around the state. ERA, education and outreach, as you can imagine, that is a big one for us. And we find especially, there is some excitement around it now. With like you saw those headlines that I had before, they were all recent headlines. They were all from like the last year or so. And there are younger women that are starting to hear about it, understand why we need it. We're hoping to really use that outreach to grow our audience to a younger sort of feminist culture. And lastly, we also have a PAC. So we have a Now New Jersey PAC. We endorse candidates at the state level. And this year we have 80 assembly races in our state. So we will be looking at those candidates and endorsing some of them. So these are some of the things that we're doing for this year. What can you do? If you don't take anything else from this presentation tonight, I would say the most important thing to me that I hope you take away is that we need to have more women in office. It really, really, really makes a difference. So whether you run for office, you go volunteer for somebody, you help somebody run a campaign, you raise funds, or you knock on doors. I think it's really, really, really important. Marching is great, but we're not going to change laws that way. The only way we're really going to achieve equality in terms of the law eventually, soon, is if we elect more women. So for everybody who says, and I've talked to a lot of women who say, like, gender shouldn't matter. It should be whoever's the best qualified. It does matter. It really does. And lastly, I'd like to share this quote because to me, this speaks to why I do this. And it really is not just for me or for my daughters, but for every little girl out there. In order to be able to recognize her potential, to fulfill it, to really do what she wants to do. To me, that's what it's about. To me, feminism is about choice and control. And when I say choice, I don't just mean the choice of, what's done to my body, which is most people think of choice as when it comes to feminism. But to me, it's choice of career. Like, I don't want somebody else to tell me what I can be or cannot be. Who I choose to love. Whether or not I have children. Whether or not I even have a career. Should be my choice. That freedom is what it's about. I do not want to give control of that to any religious organization, any cultural or traditional norm, or especially not my government. So that to me is the core of feminism. It's about equality and choice, freedom of choice. Thank you. I hope you've enjoyed that.
to go back a few slides. I am looking for the number of the bills on the sexual assault. Yeah, I just needed that so I could see, because I usually work with the Women and Family Issues of the state of New Jersey and the Legal Women Voters, and I usually try to keep track of, and I missed that one. That was in the works. I knew about the maternal health bills. I've been watching that, and they sort of like showed up in January, and they were voted unanimously. So I went, okay, we don't have to worry about that. I mean, because we've been looking at it, and we were concerned about the data, and that New Jersey is 47. And, but yeah, 14 bills came up and they went right through. They actually went through appropriations also.
Right, so they just passed appropriations this week.
So I was looking at the other one about the New Jersey Coalition Against Sexual Assault. So I just wanted to copy those.
So NJ CASA is actually an organization, and they are the sort of the primary partner that we're working with. They're very focused on it. This was their bill. They've actually been fighting for this, believe it or not, over 10 years. Even now, they did not get exactly, like, it's not their dream bill. There's been a lot of negotiation, and it's sort of a compromise. So there is no criminal statute of limitations in New Jersey. The civil statute of limitations was 2 years, and they got expanded to 7 years. And also for, for victims of sexual abuse as minors, because a lot of them, it may take years for that trauma to subside to the point where they even remember it. They had the opportunity to do it, I think, until the age of 55 or something like that.
Does that cover I'm sorry, I was just going to ask one more question. Does that bill cover the women who are assaulted in the prisons?
This is
When they sue?
yes, they will be able to sue. Because they
Under
can sue.
this?
Yes, so it allows them to sue organizations as well. Right. But I know that that's a separate issue that's also getting more deeper scrutiny in terms of just, preventative, I think, more than the, litigation part of it.
I have a question.
Yeah.
If the ERA were ratified, how would that change the gag rule, Title 10 stuff that you were talking about?
So if the ERA is ratified, I believe built into the provision of the ERA is a 2-year window where every state would have 2 years to look at all the laws in their books and see, and also at the federal level, to see if any of them need to be changed basis on, basically, they're doing gender discrimination. And it doesn't mean that every state is going to go and change those laws in 2 years, but what it gives you then is the right to sue after the 2 years. So, for example, something like the Title IX, well then, there's already people, these organizations that are suing Title IX, right? But the problem comes that when it gets to the Supreme Court, they don't get the same level of scrutiny as a race bias or a religious bias. So if the ERA was there, we would get that gender bias in, and we would be more likely to
So it
have
just
a rule in our
strengthens
favor.
the positions.
I realized actually one of the things that I forgot to mention that I meant to, and I'm surprised that we picked up on it. So, we talked about a deadline, right? So there was a deadline on the ERA ratification, so why are we still looking at it? So what happened was in 1992, the 27th, I think it was the 27th or 29th amendment was passed. And that was something known as the Madison Amendment. And the Madison Amendment was first proposed in 1789, and it has to do with whether Congress can give themselves pay raises. So the fact that the Madison Amendment was passed after 200 years, it was ratified after 200 years. It takes it makes the 7-year and then that other extension look very sort of arbitrary. So based on that, and the fact that when the ERA was actually written and ratified, the amendment clause is not part of the actual ERA amendment. It is a separate clause. there is belief among scholars that it can be challenged. So it will first be challenged as a congressional bill to remove that ratification deadline. And then we fully expect that to be challenged in court. And I was actually looking at it because until the last session of Congress, which ended in December, every session there would be ERA bills that would be introduced in both the House and the Senate, and two different variations of it. So one was just a straight ERA, like starting the whole process again. And then one was the suspension of the deadline. But since this January, I could not find that bill again. It has not been introduced in this session of Congress. But I think that, we're so close to that 38th state that if we do get it, I'm sure they will go ahead and, because usually I believe it was Jackie Spear of California was the sponsor of that bill. I'm sure that will get introduced if we get the 38th state.
Well, that kind of answers my question. So if the 38th state does ratify it, it still has to be reintroduced into the House and Senate.
Well, there'll be measures to remove the deadline, what we call the artificial deadline that was imposed by Congress, because there are scholars out there that challenge the constitutionality of that.
There's no guarantee.
There's no guarantee.
Can you just talk about the assembly races in New Jersey coming up? Like, how many women are running and what efforts are being made?
So we don't actually know how many women are running yet, because the filing deadline is actually April 1st. So once we have, we go through April 1st, and there's a primary in June. We tend to not endorse in the primary. We will wait until June to see who the final candidates are, and then we will look at them.
Are you going to run again?
No, I actually, in my current role as now president, I cannot be a candidate. So, not for the next 2 or 3 years anyway. You got any
Is there any thought of why Nevada was able to elect so many women?
Good question. I love that question, actually. I will have to look into that. Yeah, it is pretty amazing, actually. Yeah. So for the first time, actually, I'm not sure if you guys are aware, New Jersey does have a majority of women in their cabinet. So under the new Murphy administration, we make up actually more than 50% of the cabinet. So that is also a first for New Jersey. Yeah.
Another question you may have to just research, but how, for municipal government, has there ever been majority women in New Jersey, even in just the town level?
No.
It's amazing. That's women not voting for women.
Well, and also women not running.
Women not running.
Right.
It's just kind of chicken and egg, right?
Yeah. And that's why I said, for everybody who says that gender should not matter, the most qualified candidate, I would say the one takeaway, it does matter. So if we could get more women to vote for women, we would win.
I was on the Chatham Township Committee. I just want to say that once you get into a job like that, every other job you're in, you feel like it's all about seniority, and you can't say what's gender bias, or just, I left the workforce to be a mom or whatever. But when you're on the township committee, everyone is coming in, and most people don't know much about government, and a lot of people haven't even been on the planning board or anything that you could say work their way up. And for me, it was the most enlightening, I guess, in terms of how men work, and the respect they get for faking stuff, like just looking like you have bigger shoulders and saying anything that just your voice is deeper and you say it with confidence and you don't have to know the answer. Whereas I just felt like, oh my gosh, I just would want to know the answer before I speak. Like, it's just a different approach. And so it was just because everyone is immediately equal, just like you were back in 4th grade, and girls can excel as well as boys. It's kind of like being back in 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th grade, because you just see boys are behaving differently, and it doesn't have anything to do with.
Do you think that the men are getting more respect because they're men?
Some of them are. Some of them
Or
are.
that the men have more confidence? Or have been taught to...
It's a cultural, they've been taught to
project
project confidence, and women are taught to only be confident when they know 110% of the answer.
But it's documented that that's why women don't run for office.
Right.
Because they're reluctant, because they have studied that. They're reluctant to run because they feel that unless they are 100% sure of what they're saying, then they can't run. They can't be in position. Whereas a man would be, and this is documented, a man just feels that he can do it, and so he runs. And that's why women are so reluctant to run. They're not ready to take on the job.
Right.
Well, I mean, even in the workplace, I believe it's many studies done, women apply for jobs. So a man looks at a job listing and he looks at, the qualifications required. And if he meets 30, 40% of that, he's like, I'm going to apply.
Right.
Whereas women feel like they need to at least meet 80 to 90% before they will apply. But going back to talking about the differences, and we're seeing these in workplaces now, all these workplaces that are looking for diversity. Because when you're in a group where, such as town council or whatever, just the fact that you have different voices that have different experiences, not just gender, people of color, different ethnic backgrounds, the end result usually is better because you have different voices, right? Right? And I think, so the fact that women who are 51% of the population have been shut out of that for so long, is a really big reason why we have some of these laws in our books still. Right?
There's research, and I've seen and read articles, and we probably all have anecdotal stories in our own families of women who don't support other women for a variety of reasons. Do you feel that that's changing? Do you see it as more of a generational thing? Because I see it more in, mother or mother-in-law, aunt kind of thing, less so in my generation and my kids. What are your thoughts?
I hear about it all the time. I've seen it in my own life, in my workplace and elsewhere. I will say that what I've learned, and especially in the last 2-3 years, that I've been working on campaigns that ran last year with now. What I've learned is you need to find your own tribe. That's how I like to say it. So you need to find women who think like you, believe that it is important for women to support women. And in my life in the last year, it's made a tremendous difference. To have a supportive network that I can go to when I have doubt myself, that happens, right, self-doubt, or when I just need assistance and I know that these people are going to be there for me. There will always be naysayers. You will always have, and sometimes they're the squeaky wheel, but the important thing is to not give them the attention. So that's another thing that I think men do differently from women, where men have a better time just ignoring it and keeping their eyes sort of on the prize, keeping their focus on whatever goal that they're trying to achieve, whereas women tend to get distracted because we want everybody to like us, right? So I think that's important to sort of realize that you're not going to make everybody happy, and at some point you just have to move on. Yep.
Has now New Jersey, or even you personally, formed an opinion about the Brennan-Alvarez crises in Trenton?
So now New Jersey doesn't have an opinion, and I can't speak on their behalf. I did have a conversation recently with somebody that really made me think about it in a very different way. And this is somebody who had attended most of those hearings in person and had been in the room. And I was having a conversation because I was kind of struggling with it myself. I didn't know what to believe and what not to believe. I want to believe Katie Brennan. I want to believe that, what she's saying is true. Yet we have two different prosecutors' offices that have now said there's not enough evidence for them to move forward, which my own experience with prosecutors' offices, that could mean anything. But I was talking to this young woman, and she said that the problem is that sexual assault, everybody wants it to be like black and white. And very often it's not, it's gray. And just hypothetically, so what if this was a young woman who was lonely because even though she's married, her husband was away for an extended length of time, and maybe she was having an affair. And maybe that one night, there was something where, she did not give consent and it was forced on her, right? So most of us would agree that it's still sexual assault. But now when you go to the prosecutor, and you have to tell the prosecutor that, yes, I'm married, but I was having an affair with him. Yes, I did invite him up to my apartment. And you see how that case, all of a sudden, the prosecutor's like, I don't know if I have anything here. And it was really interesting for me to hear this young woman tell me this, because it really made me think about how there are all these gray areas, right? And in terms of the law, it's really hard to pinpoint them. And we see that even with like the Me Too movement, right? Because, some of them are very clear cases of harassment. And then, I don't know if you guys are aware of the Aziz Ansari story. And so here was a young lady who went out on a date with this comedian. And by her own admission, they were engaged in some kind of foreplay, and at some point she said no. He called her a cab and sent her home. But because she did not think that he was skillful, or she didn't like the way it had gone, she called him out in the media. And just most of us, we would question, whether there was any real harassment or whatever. But his career took a hit. It really did. And unfortunately, those are the kinds of stories that can be very damning for women's causes. I don't know if you know, but there was a very big backlash against the Me Too movement post the Brett Kavanaugh hearings as well. Because there was a lot of people, given the way the hearings went, which was so, echoes of Anita Hill, right? Mm-hmm. But many people still to this day believe that the fact that we now have Brett Kavanaugh as a justice on the Supreme Court means that Ms. Blasey Ford lied. And there are journalists, there are a multitude of articles, especially in the right-wing media, where, that's like the paintbrush that brushes over the entire Me Too movement. See, this is what they are. So it's difficult. It's, these are issues that are new, that we grapple with, that hopefully, at some point as a society, we will be able to realize that there are shades and, find a way to resolve them.
I think I just have to make a comment on what you said about the Katie Brennan, because I knew her from my last job. And I think it's very dangerous to make any implications or to put out any implications about her private life. If it was just the two of them in the room, it's a he said, she said kind of situation. So that may be why the prosecutors are saying there's not enough.
Right, it could be anything, we don't know. The other thing that actually is disturbing about the Katie Brennan and Alvarez situation. It was, I think, just in the media today. And this is actually something that the NJ Coalition Against Sexual Assault is going to probably end up looking at, is the prosecutor's notes on Katie Brennan's testimony to them, which should have been confidential, were actually released to Alvarez because he said he needed them for his testimony in front of the legislature. And the first thing he did was leak it to the media. Kudos to the media, though. They have refused to report it or print it.
But isn't there still an issue that the Middlesex prosecutor really didn't do an investigation?
Right?
They did not say, okay, we'll start from scratch and we'll do our own. They just took the files from the Bergen County.
Right. Well, not only that, I mean, the Senate committee never had her testify. They closed the hearing without hearing from her.
And how does it that nobody knows who hired him?
You're right, that's what you're saying.
When we hire somebody, there's a whole paperwork trail. People sign off, we do background checks, so somebody makes the offer, somebody signs the paperwork. It's
That's so strange, right?
bizarre.
Yes.
Yeah, right.
But even the non-disclosure acts that, what are they? Pacts that they have with the campaign. Does that cover a criminal act? I keep thinking, if she just had her pocketbook stolen by another campaign worker, would she be able to disclose that under that non-disclosure agreement that all the campaign workers had to sign? I'm still trying to understand those agreements, those non-disclosure agreements, that they've changed them now. They finally said, they just did it recently, but they did not make them retroactive.
Right.
So they just changed that recently. But I kept thinking, if there's a criminal act, you're still bound by that non-disclosure agreement because you're a campaign worker? I mean, I never saw anything that addressed that. I mean, if this is a criminal act, why would anyone be bound by a non-disclosure agreement? I thought that's just campaign strategies they're talking about. Not that you can't write out
I'm not
another
sure what
campaign
that
work.
is about because, I'm not sure that covered that. And I mean, she did report it. What we don't know is whether anything, and I think we can't safely assume that nothing was actually done about her reporting it.
So I'd like to thank everyone for having come, and I just want to invite you to come next month. We have a speaker. His name is Dr. David Robinson. He's coming on Thursday, April 11th, and he is the New Jersey State climatologist, and he's going to be speaking on climate change in the Garden State. So that's Thursday, April 11th at 7:30, same place, same station, the whole thing. And on your way out, please help yourself to some foods, as there seems to be quite a bit of it. And I want to thank you very much for coming. Joining us. Thank you.
I'm going to make one last pitch. We do have some now forums if you want to sign up on there. Also at the Union County level, it was only about a year ago that we sort of restarted our Union County chapter. And we are actually looking for not just new members, we're looking for people who want to take on leadership roles. So if you want to join or know anybody else who would want to, we would love to have you.
Great.
Thank you.